At the moment, awareness passed beyond the tangled jungles of samsaric existence. Wonder and amazement arose in me as I sat alone amidst the mountainous wilderness of northern Chanthaburi. It was clear that ignorance had ceased creating future births in the various realms of sentient existence. What remained was a completely pure awareness. As the sun rose above the mountain peaks, I bowed deeply in my heart to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, those three absolutely pure jewels which had been fused into the one unconditioned element of Nibbāna. A heart filled with Dhamma reflected with immense gratitude on everyone who had so graciously assisted me in reaching the land of freedom. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the many sacrifices my parents had made on my behalf. It was impossible to assess the value of all their love and care for me. A moment of rapturous joy arose at the thought that I could now truly repay my great debt of gratitude to them. My gratitude for Ajaan Mun's love and compassion knew no bounds. He had taken this worthless-looking old rag, tamed and refined its coarse and clumsy exterior, and polished the gold concealed inside until it had shone forth unhindered in all directions. I felt as though he had given me renewed courage every time I began to falter. He acted as both a mother and father in my times of need, to such an extent that I knew I would never be able to repay even a small part of the debt I owed him. He was living proof of that which knows. Sailing on the raft of his compassionate guidance, my heart had reached the other shore. With the turbulent waves and karmic consequences of greed, ill will, and delusion now left behind, I was free to leave the precious raft behind at the shoreline. How incredible! I continued to reside in that small cave under a cliff in the wilderness, resting serenely in the undefiled bliss of final release from suffering. My heart rejoiced in the peace and quiet of that sparsely populated mountain region where human contact was limited to the folks giving food on my daily alms round. That wild, uncivilized jungle area was inhabited by good, honest, moral people. Even jungles with dense forests, tangled vegetation, and wild animals aren't as dangerous as the civilized jungles of human society. Places overrun with entangling defilements where greed, hatred, and delusion are constantly on the prowl. These ferocious mental tigers inflict deep internal wounds, gradually eroding a person's physical and mental health until the damage becomes acute. Such injuries are extremely difficult to treat. Though the wounds tend to fester menacingly, those who are afflicted usually neglect their injuries, hoping they will somehow heal by themselves. As the 1949 hot season neared and the sweltering heat and humidity began intensifying in the high jungles of northern Chanthaburi, I made my way back down to the marshy seashore communities of my youth. Relieved by then from all encumbering burdens, both mental and physical, I somewhat reluctantly returned to Sīlaratano Forest Monastery to resume my responsibilities as temporary abbot of the small monastic community there, which of course meant living again amid the thorns and brambles of mundane society. Initially, I had contemplated taking the excellent Dhamma in my heart and teaching it to the people in my hometown. But eventually I concluded that it was beyond the spiritual power and ability of those people to grasp the radically profound nature of that supreme Dhamma. When I reflected on it, I felt disheartened by the prospect of trying to explain the amazing nature of that attainment to others, and so decided to remain silent when I returned. After taking up my former position as abbot, I began to contemplate my next move. By that time, I had served as the temporary abbot of Sīlaratano Forest Monastery off and on for 2 full years. The 2 monks who were supposed to return from Ajaan Mun's monastery to replace me had still not returned. Feeling that I'd already done all I possibly could to repay the debt of gratitude I owed my parents, I decided the time had come for me to wander freely again. As I had no intention to become a permanent abbot in my hometown monastery, I decided that I'd stayed there long enough. My spirit yearned to return to the wilds, to live in caves under overhanging cliffs or beneath shady trees. It occurred to me that I'd never traveled to the south of Thailand. Ajaan Lee Damodaro, who mentored me in my early years as a monk, had spent many years wandering Dhutanga in Thailand's southern provinces, so I decided to follow in his footsteps. I hoped to find a quiet, secluded cave in an area where nobody knew me. I felt as free as a bird, released to fly with no attachments to hold me down. My heart felt satiated in every way. Indeed, the Buddha and his Arahant disciples chose to live at ease in the depths of the forest, abiding pleasantly in the here and now. For me, Ajaan Mun had always led the way. Even after he had thoroughly cleansed his mind of all defilements, a time when he could afford to relax in the company of like-minded followers, he chose instead to abide in secluded and tranquil wilderness areas, even though that arduous lifestyle took a toll on his physical health. He simply relied on the power of Dhamma, using its potency as all the noble ones had to maintain the well-being of body and mind. I traveled south by train and disembarked at Sawi district in Chumphon province, located about 300 miles down the southern peninsula. I soon set off hiking into the mountains, camping at suitable sites beside the trail. I occasionally hung my umbrella tent near a villager's garden or in an orchard. I lived off the fruits of my daily alms round like a honeybee, sampling the pollen from one blossom to another without worry or concern. After months of Dhutanga wandering in the mountains of Sawi district, I met a group of villagers who led me to a cave deep in a tropical jungle abounding with wild animals. The large cavern there had once been part of an ancient monastery complex, but had long since been abandoned. The villagers invited me to reside there for the upcoming rains retreat and offered to renovate a section of the monastery if I agreed. I accepted the invitation mainly because I liked the cave and its location. Staying in a cave surrounded by dangerous animals would force me to remain alert and mindfully aware. Important elements of abiding pleasantly here and now. Although I'd reached a stage where I could rest in peace and tranquility under all conditions, I still utilized external aspects of Dhamma to keep body and mind healthy and vigorous. I spent the 1949 rainy season retreat at that cave in peace and solitude. No sooner did the retreat end than the same village group invited me to reside there permanently. They promised that if I agreed to stay on, they would raise funds to expand the monastery's living space to accommodate more monks. Seeing the danger of a long-term commitment as more frightening than the danger of wild animals, I slipped away quietly one day and resumed my Dhutanga wanderings. I trekked 180 miles further south to Nakhon Si Thammarat province and stayed at Mahayong Monastery for a short while before hiking another 150 miles to Songkhla province in the deep south, reaching there in November of 1949. I settled for a while at Hui Yang near Ban Pru village in the Hat Yai district. Not long after setting up camp at Hui Yang in the second week of November, I had a startling vision of Ajaan Mun. A vivid mental image of his pale, dead body lying motionless within an open casket appeared suddenly in my meditation. I witnessed him departing the realm of samsaric existence forever to enter the liberation realm of anupadisesa Nibbāna, the absolute cessation of all suffering. The image was clear and unmistakable. On alms round the next morning, I asked one of the villagers if he'd heard any news about Ajaan Mun. Although he had not, I wasn't entirely reassured. I had a strong feeling my vision was an omen. I seemed to recall him saying that he would die in his 80th year. Upon returning from alms round, as I sat eating the food I'd received, a messenger came to inform me that news bulletins on the local radio were announcing that the venerable Ajaan Mun Buridato had passed away the night before at Sudawat Monastery in Sakon Nakhon. Hearing that, I immediately finished eating and walked straight to the back of the building. There, in private, my chest heaved, and I sobbed as an uncontrollable emotion arose and lodged in my throat, nearly choking me. I felt a terrible sense of loss. A feeling of eternal gratitude and reverence washed over me when I reflected on the departure of the man who had so illuminated my life and brightened my heart. He had always been close at hand and ready to help resolve my doubts and provide me with inspiration. I knew I had to return to Sakon Nakhon immediately. Fortunately, Ajaan Mun's senior disciples had arranged to have news of his death broadcast over the radio and printed in the newspapers so that his faithful followers would have access to the news wherever they might be. Even though I was deep in the south of the country at that time, I still had the opportunity to pay my final respects in a timely manner. I boarded a train heading north that day. I stopped over in Chantaburi to meet with Ajaan Lee Damadaro and asked him what course of action he wanted me to take. Night had fallen by the time I arrived. Ajaan Lee was about to preside over a patimokkha recitation of the monks' disciplinary rules. Evidently, he was waiting for me to arrive to join them, even though I had not notified him in advance about my plans. The next morning, he told Tan Phuong, who had returned to train with Ajaan Lee some years before, and me to proceed quickly to Sakon Nakhon and help with the funeral arrangements. He planned to join us later. When we arrived at Suda Wat Monastery, we were told that prominent senior monks, in consultation with local government officials, had decided that it would be best to keep Ajaan Mun's body for several months before proceeding with the cremation. An agreement had been reached that the cremation should take place during the time of the waxing moon in January of 1950. In the meantime, a special casket had been arranged to hold the body. I headed straight for the pavilion where Ajaan Mun's body lay in state. As I glanced down into the open casket at Ajaan Mun's still, lifeless body, tears welled up in my eyes and flowed down my cheeks. I was helpless to stop them. I knelt beside the casket and performed 3 long bows to pay my final respects to the venerable monk who had such a profound impact on my life. All other thoughts evaporated, leaving only an overpowering sense of love and gratitude in that moment of supreme stillness. Outside the pavilion, large kerosene lamps floodlit the monastery grounds, where people milled around uncertainly, seemingly lost. I could hear chaotic sounds of grief and lamentation from the crowd of visitors who waited patiently for their chance to go inside and pay their respects to Ajaan Mun's body. In the months leading up to the cremation ceremony, hundreds of monks who also wished to pay him their final respects arrived in Sakon Nakhon. Although most then returned home, over 100 remained, residing in the monastery to help coordinate all the funeral arrangements. The people of Sakon Nakhon put forth a concerted effort to make life as convenient as possible for the monks and novices gathered there for the occasion. Despite the large influx of monks, local residents were prepared to support them each day with an abundance of alms food. The line of monks receiving food every morning stretched into the distance, but people remained unstinting in their generosity from the first day to the last. They worked tirelessly and with enthusiasm to ensure that this huge funeral ceremony would be an unqualified success. Well in advance of the cremation date, monks and novices who wished to attend were arriving in large numbers. The cremation ceremony itself was expected to attract a crowd of thousands. Soon after I arrived, a critical shortage of clean water became apparent. Unless sufficient water could be found quickly, the monastery compound would soon become unlivable. Seeing that I was still young and robust, a senior monk ordered me to take charge of the search for a reliable source of water. Lay supporters had been digging the ground in random locations with crude picks and long-handled hoes for so long that their hands were raw and blistered, but they still hadn't found groundwater. To avoid wasting time and energy, I decided to focus a combined effort on one promising spot at the edge of the woods, where the group quickly began to dig a wide vertical shaft in search of an underground water source. I also joined in the work, stripping off my shoulder cloth and working bare-chested under the winter sun to fill large wicker baskets with soil from the pit and haul them to the surface by hand. I must have looked like just another layman on the job, but monastic decorum be damned. We had a critical objective to achieve, and I needed freedom of movement to do my part. Once we finally reached an adequate source of groundwater, we were able to provide enough fresh water to last for the 3 months leading up to the funeral ceremony. I was also tasked with completing construction of the funeral pyre and the main ceremonial pavilion, as well as many small dwellings to house the monks and novices. Several smaller pavilions were constructed to provide shelter for lay participants, and many places to prepare and cook meals were set up around the grounds to provide an adequate supply of food for the large crowd that was expected to attend the important occasion. I was kept so busy for those 3 months that I hardly found time to rest. But in my heart, I never complained. I saw it as a means of honoring Ajaan Mun's virtuous perfections. As the day of the funeral ceremony drew near, monks and lay devotees flooded in from all directions, their numbers swelling until those charged with receiving them were barely able to cope. The closer it came to cremation day, the greater the multitude pouring into the monastery. In the end, no more space could be found to accommodate the hordes of people who kept arriving. By funeral day, all the huts were full, and the whole extensive tract of forest within the monastery grounds was crowded with monks and novices who had traveled from all over the region. Most of them simply camped out in the woods. In all, well over 1,000 monks and novices were present at Ajaan Mun's cremation. As for the lay devotees, it was simply impossible to count how many were camped inside and outside the monastery grounds. And yet, amazingly, very little of the noise usually associated with such a crowded ceremony was heard. For the duration of the funeral, no instances of drinking or drunken behavior occurred, no quarreling or fighting flared up, and no cases of theft were reported. The entire event proceeded with such good taste and propriety that I couldn't help but imagine the hands of the celestial devas at work. The cremation ceremony preliminaries began on the 10th lunar day of the 3rd lunar month and culminated 4 days later with the cremation of Ajaan Mun's body at midnight on January 31st, 1950. While the special casket containing his body passed through the crowd on its way to its final resting place on the funeral pyre, many in the crowd wept openly, all mourning the loss of an exceptionally noble person. The bodily remains being carried to the pyre were all they had left of him, the last vestige of conventional reality still associated with his presence in the world. He had entered the sublime, pure realm of Nibbāna. Never again would he return to physical, bodily existence, the land of pain and suffering. The following day, when the fires of the funeral pyre had died down and Ajaan Mun's bone relics had been collected for safekeeping, the gathering of monks and lay devotees began to gradually disperse. I stayed on for several more days, determined to help clean up the monastery compound and leave the place as immaculate as possible, as it would always be the final resting place of the one person who had meant more to me than anyone else in the world.